From Arkansas.
Sadly, the United States is in the midst of the deadliest drug epidemic in our nation's history, caused by some of the deadliest drugs ever created. It appears that more than 80,000 Americans died from a drug overdose last year. By far, the biggest killers were lab-made opioids, such as fentanyl, which are cheap to produce and easy to mix with other street drugs, such as heroin. These lethal cocktails have devastated countless communities and families across our nation. Too many parents have come home to a dead child who mistakenly took a prescription pill or a so-called party drug laced with this deadly fentanyl. Illicit fentanyl, the kind created in underground Chinese drug labs or smuggled across our porous southern border by Mexican cartels, is made only to addict and kill. For these dark, terrible purposes, fentanyl is unsurpassed in the tragic history of addiction. It is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. Just 2 milligrams of fentanyl, the amount equivalent to a few grains of salt, is enough to kill a grown man. Just last December, police arrested a man in Arkansas carrying 7 pounds of fentanyl. Depending on the purity of that fentanyl, that would have been enough to deliver a fatal dose to up to 1.5 million Americans. And that's far from the biggest fentanyl bust that police have ever made. That means that every time our Border Patrol stops a drug mule coming across our southern border, every time the Coast Guard intercepts a drug runner's vessel in our waters, and every time a SWAT team raids a drug dealer's stash house, they could be averting what is in effect a mass casualty attack on our country. Unfortunately, these Mexican drug cartels and Chinese super labs are diabolically creative in waging this new kind of opium war against the United States. When American law enforcement started cracking down on fentanyl a few years ago, the cartels started producing so-called analogs or lookalikes, drugs that are chemically distinct from fentanyl, yet have no legitimate medical uses, but which will kill you just as quickly. Some of these analogs are even more powerful than fentanyl, up to 150 times more potent of a drug that I would remind you once again is itself 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. And because these drugs are chemically distinct from fentanyl, prosecuting and shutting down their creators is often prohibitively expensive, requiring law enforcement to hire expert witnesses to testify that the analog is in fact a deadly drug. So in 2018, the Drug Enforcement Administration took the necessary and prudent step of listing the entire class of fentanyl analogs as Schedule I prohibited substances. This decision closed a deadly loophole that drug dealers were using to escape punishment for poisoning our citizens, while still allowing legitimate researchers to apply for and obtain approval to research these analogs for potential medical or scientific breakthroughs. The evidence suggests that this law enforcement action has been getting results. Since the class-wide scheduling went into effect in early 2018, law enforcement encounters with uncontrolled fentanyl analogs plummeted by almost 90%. Of course, our work to solve the opioid epidemic is far from finished. We still have much to do to dismantle the cartels and the drug trafficking networks that spread fentanyl and its analogs and mix it with other drugs. But the DEA's efforts to control fentanyl analogs were a step in the right direction. Last year, the Senate voted unanimously to extend the DEA's emergency scheduling of fentanyl. But that extension is now set to expire. So we have the opportunity, in fact, I would say we have the responsibility to permanently control these deadly fentanyl analogs so law enforcement has the legal backup it needs to take these dangerous drugs off the streets. If Congress doesn't act, this emergency scheduling order is set to expire next week. The authority of our Border Patrol to seize these drugs as they cross the border will be dramatically reduced. Cartels will once again be able to exploit loopholes to evade prosecution, and Chinese super labs will get right back to work, inventing new and creative ways to repackage fentanyl and to kill even more Americans. We cannot let that happen. I've introduced a bill to solve this problem once and for all by merely eliminating the expiration date on the law that protects us against these fentanyl analogs. I'm asking my colleagues to approve it just like we did last year, unanimously. I'd also like to urge my Democratic colleagues to disregard the liberal activist groups that are lobbying against controlling these deadly fentanyl analogs because they hope to use it as a bargaining chip to reduce criminal penalties for the most serious drug traffickers. Think about that. More Americans died of a drug overdose last year than in any other year in our history, yet these liberal activists are trying to help the drug traffickers who spread these very poisons. If they succeed, drug dealers will have an easier time killing Americans for profit, and prosecutors will have to waste valuable resources proving that each new form of fentanyl they encounter is in fact a deadly drug. We cannot play politics with this bill, trading the lives of innocent Americans for more lenient treatment for cartels and super labs. Protecting Americans from deadly fentanyl should not be treated as a bargaining piece or poker chip. I ask my colleagues to think of the victims and to think of the urgency of this measure. I'm offering this bill on behalf of tens of thousands of Americans who were with us just last year, but are not today because of these deadly synthetic drugs. And I'm offering it on behalf of the countless Americans who can still be saved if we act. So I urge my colleagues to support this measure, and therefore, Madam President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to immediate consideration of S-1410, introduced earlier today. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from New Jersey.
I'm deeply grateful for my colleague and my friend from Arkansas to bring this to the floor of the United States Senate. There is an urgency that he described that I agree with. 100 senators here, not one state has not been touched devastatingly by the fentanyl epidemic, and these analogs present a crisis to our country. Lives are at stake. And so I share his sense of urgency. I am hoping that we can work together to find a way to stop, as he put it, these cartels and these drug labs from wreaking such havoc in our country. I believe that together we can find a solution. In fact, there has been constructive talk across the Capitol, bipartisan talk, about finding a way to come to some kind of accord. In addition to that, I'm hopeful that there are other bills out there that have the same ambition, the same goal, the same sense of urgency that I believe should be part of the discussion. For example, policies like the ones in the Stop Fentanyl Act, which I understand Senator Markey will be introducing in the Senate very soon. I believe that we should have time in the Judiciary Committee to work on a longer-term solution that could not just deal with the international cartels, not just deal with these horrific drug labs, but also empower people who are addicted to begin not to be punished simply with the criminal justice system, but to find ways to provide treatment and support to people who are struggling with addictions to this horrific drug. So with that, I would like to object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The junior senator from Arkansas.
I thank my colleague from New Jersey for those remarks. I do hope that we can find a solution, but time is not on our side. This emergency scheduling order expires next week. The Senate is not in session next week. I know that we want to empower addicts, as the senator from New Jersey said, that we want to help get them treatment that they need to get back on their feet. That's a goal I share. We are talking, though, about drug dealers, drug traffickers, cartels, Chinese super labs. And if we do not pass an extension, in my bill, a permanent extension of this emergency scheduling order, it is the addicts who will be hurt, because their drug dealers and these cartels and the super labs will simply begin to flood our streets once again with these synthetic fentanyl analogs, which I remind you again can be 150 times more potent than fentanyl itself, which is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So I hope my Democratic friends will reconsider in the short time we have this week, and we'll be able to pass a permanent extension of this scheduling order. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President,
The junior senator from New Jersey.
I just want to say in conclusion, before I switch to another topic, I appreciate the senator from Arkansas's willingness to look not just at his bill, but also the power of a potential bipartisan extension or however we can deal with this, because the urgency does exist. We are in a crisis. But I rise today to speak in support of Ambassador Power's nomination to serve as administrator for the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID. Now, the mission of USAID is to advance the values of democracy throughout the world on behalf of the American people. This mission has never been more critical than today. And if confirmed, Ambassador Power will lead an agency tasked with responding not only to the global crisis of COVID-19 and its devastating impact on vulnerable people across the world, but some of the most pressing challenges facing the United States and the international community: global democratic backsliding, human suffering caused by sexual and gender-based violence, climate change, and violent conflict around the world. Now, Ambassador Power is an extraordinary public servant. She has distinguished herself in her career, and she is more than capable of leading USAID's efforts to address these global urgencies, and she is clear-eyed and sober about the international challenges she will face, USAID will face as well. Over the past 4 years, experts and career professionals within the USAID were unfortunately silenced. Decisions were politicized, and recruitment and retention were inadequate. Ambassador Power will be the kind of leader this agency now needs to restore integrity, transparency, rebuild morale among the dedicated professionals who drive USAID's critical mission. Ambassador Power also understands that the U.S. will remain a global leader, really must remain a global leader, able to counter the influence of China's aggressive diplomatic and development agenda. If USAID is seen once and again by our international partners, this mission of countering China will be stronger. If USAID is seen as a competent and trustworthy partner, we will build along our coalitions to counter China's aggressive actions. President Biden could not have nominated someone more ready, more capable than Ambassador Power. She has had an impressive career, and she has, from her work as a Pulitzer Prize-writing journalist to spending 8 years in the Obama administration and the National Security Council, and then as ambassador to the United Nations, where she championed the rights of women, atrocity prevention, LGBTQ rights, receiving consensus with other countries on vital U.S. interests, while going toe-to-toe with our adversaries. This is one of our more experienced international diplomats from America that we have today. And by elevating Ambassador Powell to the National Security Council, President Biden has made it clear that development and humanitarian assistance will be an integral component to our meeting our foreign policy objectives. That is important, that we understand that development and humanitarian assistance are a critical part of our foreign policy. And so finally, I just want to end with something that Ambassador Power shared in her most recent book. It's something that I think speaks so well to her humility, to her willingness to learn, and to why she will be the leader of the USAID, and I say our entire nation and the world needs right now. Ambassador Power wrote about a meeting she had with the ambassador from Central from the Central African Republic, Charles Dubin, who described to her the horrific violence taking place in his country. She wrote about during that meeting that she told him she didn't have an agenda. She just wanted to learn from him about what was happening in her country. She then writes that he started speaking and then stops and gets very emotional. And she assumes he is getting emotional about the horrific violence in his country, but he says to her, and I quote, "No, it's not that, Ambassador. What is happening in my country is terrible, more terrible than anything that has ever happened to us before. But I am emotional because you are here. The United States of America is the greatest country in the world, and you, America, are here." That is the vision of America that has defined Ambassador Power's career, that has guided her. The awesome responsibility of representing this nation and her values, her rootedness in the ideals of our nation: humility, grace, compassion, thoughtful leadership. I've known Ambassador Powell since she and I were very young. It's been decades now of friendship and connection. You could say many things about her, but at her core is decency and honor. She will represent the best of us. She is exactly the leader we need right now as we navigate increasing and pressing challenges facing the world and our country. I am thankful. It'd be enough for Ambassador Powell to retire. It'd be enough for her to say, "I have served my country," and like Cincinnatus, return to her plow. But clearly, her calling is not yet fully been answered. She will continue, should this body believe it and endorse it, to serve this country. She will continue to honor the United States of America. She will continue to be a credit to our nation and the world. And that is why I urge my colleagues to support her nomination. I yield the floor.